For centuries it was the rhythm of life, the plow turning the earth, the church bell marking the hours, the bustling markets connecting kingdoms. By the early 14th century, Europe was a continent reborn, population booming, trade routes flourishing, a dizzying height of medieval civilization. But beneath the veneer of prosperity, a fragility lay hidden. Years of climate change, the Great Famine, and rising social tensions had left the continent vulnerable. The stage was set for a catastrophe that would shatter the world as they knew it. A disaster not of war, but of a microscopic, relentless enemy. We know it today as the Black Death, a pandemic of bubonic plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Its journey began far to the east, in the steppes of Central Asia. Slowly, inexorably, it followed the pathways of prosperity, the Silk Road and the vast trading networks that linked east to west. The first confirmed European gateway was the Crimean port of Kaffa. Besieged by the Mongol Golden Horde, a grotesque act of biological warfare, catapulting infected corpses over the city walls, likely sealed the city's fate. In October 1347, Genoese trading ships fled Kaffa, carrying not just goods but a devastating cargo: infected rats and their fleas. The ships landed first in Sicily, then spread to the bustling, wealthy ports of mainland Italy: Genoa, Venice, Pisa. From there, the plague moved with terrifying speed. In a world with little understanding of contagion, the very act of living, of trading, praying, and gathering became a death sentence. By 1348, France and Spain were engulfed. The wealthy could flee, but they often carried the disease with them. The poor, trapped in crowded, unsanitary cities, were the first to fall. This was not a slow march. It was a devastating sprint. The symptoms were unmistakable and horrifying. Victims suffered high fever, vomiting, and agonizing joint pains. But the telltale sign, the one that gave the bubonic plague its name, was the appearance of large black putrid swellings, the buboes in the groin, neck, and armpits. Death was often swift, arriving within days of the first symptoms. The pneumonic form, spread directly from person to person through the air, was even faster, killing in less than 24 hours. There was no cure, only fear and the stench of decay. The sheer scale of death quickly overwhelmed society's structures. Priests refused to administer last rites, doctors fled, and the ancient customs of burial collapsed. Entire villages were emptied. Cities became mass graves. Law and order dissolved. Some turned to hedonism, believing they should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow they would die. Others turned to God, or rather to frenzied acts of devotion. The flagellants marched across Europe, whipping themselves publicly as penance, believing the plague was God's punishment for humanity's sins. With no scientific explanation, people searched desperately for a cause. When the true enemy was invisible, the easiest target was the neighbor. Rumors spread like a secondary plague that wells had been poisoned. Across Europe, the Jewish community was targeted. Already marginalized, they became the convenient scapegoat for a disaster no one understood. Despite papal bulls pleading for their protection, massacres or pogroms erupted, a horrific injustice born of terror and superstition. Amidst the panic and the dying, a strange figure emerged: the plague doctor. Hired by city officials, their job was not to cure, but to tally the dead and record wills. Their iconic, terrifying costume, the long leather coat, the wide-brimmed hat, and the grotesque bird-like mask, was an attempt at protection. The beak was filled with strong-smelling herbs, meant to ward off the bad air, the miasma they believed caused the disease. The cane was used to examine patients without touching them. They were symbols of medieval medical desperation, terrifying, powerless, and utterly unforgettable. From 1347 to 1351, the Black Death swept through Europe like a wildfire. It is estimated to have killed between 30% and 60% of the continent's population, a death toll of up to 50 million people. Entire generations were wiped out. In cities like Florence, over half the residents perished. The pandemic moved north and east, through England, the Scandinavian countries, and finally into Russia. The speed of the spread, once attributed solely to rats, is now understood to have been accelerated by human body lice and fleas, turning the pneumonic form into an unstoppable human-to-human wave. When the plague finally receded, the world it left behind was unrecognizable. The sudden, massive drop in population created a profound economic shock. Land was abundant, but labor was scarce. This sudden scarcity of workers completely inverted the balance of power. Peasants, once tied to the land, could now demand higher wages and better conditions. Feudalism, the bedrock of medieval society, began to crumble. Governments tried to impose wage caps, but the market forces were too strong. The old order was dying, replaced by a nascent power structure centered on the value of the individual worker. The psychological impact was equally profound. The plague didn't care about social status. It took the king and the beggar alike. This new terrifying equality was captured in art by the chilling concept of the danse macabre, the dance of death. It served as a constant, brutal reminder of mortality, a theme that permeated all of post-plague culture, forcing a pivot from pure religious focus toward a greater appreciation for earthly life and human achievement. This new worldview was one of the seeds of the Renaissance itself. The utter failure of medieval medicine spurred critical change. Universities and physicians realized that the old theories of imbalances and bad air were inadequate. The need for a rational, observable explanation led to the earliest forms of public health measures. New systems were created: quarantines, isolation hospitals, and dedicated health boards to control the spread. Venice, in particular, pioneered the concept of a mandatory 40-day isolation period, the quarantina, for incoming ships, recognizing the power of separation to stop the invisible enemy. The Black Death of 1347 to 1351 was only the start of the Second Plague pandemic. The bacterium Yersinia pestis had established reservoirs in European rodent populations. Outbreaks would recur violently for the next 300 years, shaping European life. The Great Plague of London in 1665, the Plague of Marseille in 1720, each wave was a fresh, terrifying reminder of the great catastrophe. Only by the 18th century did improved sanitation and the gradual replacement of the black rat with the brown rat, which prefers the outdoors, lead to the plague's retreat from Europe. It wasn't until the late 19th century that scientists definitively identified the culprit. In 1894, during the Third Plague pandemic, Swiss-French doctor Alexandre Yersin isolated the bacillus responsible, which was named in his honor, Yersinia pestis. Understanding the mechanics, the rat, the flea, the bacteria, finally allowed humanity to contain this ancient scourge. Today, the plague is treatable with antibiotics, but it remains endemic in various parts of the world, a silent, deadly potential that demands our continued vigilance. The Black Death was more than just a devastating pandemic. It was a hinge point in history. It destroyed an old world order, yet in its destruction it forged the foundations of a new one. A world with greater social mobility, a shift towards individualism, and the eventual birth of modern medical science. It stands as the ultimate reminder of humanity's shared vulnerability to the unseen world. A lesson in the importance of trade-offs between global connection and biological isolation. A testament to the fragility of civilization when faced with an enemy that knows no borders, respects no wealth, and shows no mercy. The Black Death is a story of death on an unimaginable scale, but it is also a story of resilience, of radical change, and of the enduring human struggle to understand and survive the invisible forces that shape our destiny.